Hey guys, this is Tim Miller. You're not going to believe this. Well, actually, you probably are going to believe this. The moderate Republicans, the so-called moderate Republicans in Congress, are on the verge of folding to the crazies yet again. It is the same story that we've had ever since Trump came down the escalator in 2015, and this time it's happening in the speaker's race. Let me explain. So, we had to suffer through these articles over the last few weeks of the so-called normal Republicans, the closet normals, out there saying that, we needed Kevin McCarthy to protect the institution, and we wanted Democrats to work with us to stay with Kevin McCarthy because we don't want some wild-eyed, crazy conspiracist to be speaker, and the institution of the House demands it, and blah, blah, blah. There was all this wish casting on cable news and elsewhere that maybe these normal Republicans for once would show a spine, they'd stand up to their crazy wing, they'd work with Hakeem Jeffries and try to come up with a mainstream speaker of the House. Well, here we are on Monday, one day ahead of the vote, and one by one, they are all folding to Jim Jordan just as they did to Donald Trump. Now, Jim Jordan is not just some regular MAGA guy. He's not a MAGA person that's pretending. He has been on the leading edge of the Republican conspiracy making in the Trump era. This is the guy that was plotting with Trump on January 6th to try to overthrow the 2020 election. Liz Cheney and the January 6th committee have detailed extensively just how much Jim Jordan was actively plotting with Trump to overturn the election. This was not just some guy that voted to overturn the election like Kevin McCarthy. That's not good. But he was not a passive participant. He was an active coup plotter. And this is just part of a long history of things of this nature that Jim Jordan has been involved in. There was the story in Ohio, his home state, of the young girl who was raped and was unable to get an abortion after the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And Jim Jordan was one of those who was out on social media, calling that young girl and the doctor a liar, saying that this wasn't true, that the rape was a fantasy. Well, it turns out, no, it was true. And the rapist has since been convicted. So this is how Jim Jordan rolls. He goes along with whatever the craziest conspiracy theories are in the conservative media. He runs with them. He does anything he can to smear his political opponents. And on policy, he's fully bought in with the MAGA isolationist wing of the party. And he has not been willing to say that, he would bring up a vote on funding for Ukraine, for example, because he has bought into the Russia apologist conspiracizing of Tucker Carlson and that crowd. So, Jim Jordan is like a worst case scenario for speaker. We keep being told that there were normal, rational Republicans that were going to stand up to him. And remember, all it would take is 5. It only took 8 crazy Matt Gaetz MAGAs to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. It would only take 5 to prevent Jim Jordan from getting in the speakership. But here we are today, 24 hours away from the vote, and some of the people that you might expect, some of the people who brand themselves as more rational Republicans, are already folding. Here's Dan Crenshaw. He was interviewed by Jake Tapper over the weekend.
He defied the congressional subpoena and he was trying to get Pence to overturn the electoral votes. But anyway, you're in the Jordan camp.
But a lot of them did that. If I held that grudge, I wouldn't have friends in the Republican
that's
conference.
two-thirds of the,
a lot of them.
That's 2/3 of the conference.
Oh, poor Dan. You wouldn't have friends? I mean, isn't this guy's whole personal brand that he is the Republican with courage, with backbone? And he runs this ridiculous ad of him, in a flight suit a few years ago, where he is like a superhero that is coming to save the day. And he can't say no to somebody that tried to overthrow our democracy because he won't have friends in the GOP. Oh, poor Dan Crenshaw. So Dan Crenshaw, anyway, you can count him on the Jim Jordan camp. Just like he folded to Donald Trump, he folded to Jim Jordan. Here's Ann Wagner from Missouri, who's been kind of branded as more of a moderate mainstream candidate. She was floated by some people as maybe a potential alternative to Jordan, that maybe she could be a mainstream nominee that might get some Democratic votes. Ann Wagner, when she was asked last week whether she would support Jordan, absolutely not. Yesterday in conference, he gave the most disgraceful, ungracious speech of all time. There were gasps in the room. So there was Ann last week. Here she is today. She's supporting Jim Jordan. Let's talk about disgraceful. Maybe look in the mirror, Ann Wagner. None of these people have the courage to just do what Matt Gaetz did. Like, Matt Gaetz has more backbone than you do. I mean, that's a pretty pathetic state of affairs. This just heard Mike Rogers from Alabama who heads up one of the national security committees in the House. So very concerned about foreign policy. He's a hawk, very skeptical of the isolationist wing of the Republican Party. He put out a statement today. It's saying that he's had 2 cordial, thoughtful, and productive conversations with Jim Jordan, and they've agreed on the need to pass a Defense Authorization Act and appropriate funds for it. So that's all it took. This guy who has seen Jim Jordan be reckless, advance conspiracies, act like a child in congressional hearings. All it took was 2 conversations where Jim Jordan said that he would not block funding for defense. Notably, in that statement, not included was funds for Ukraine. Because, if Jim Jordan commits to funds from Ukraine, then he could lose folks on the isolationist MAGA wing. So these guys, these so-called moderate Republicans, can't even get concessions from Jim Jordan to just admit that he will allow a vote on Ukraine funding, something that half of Republicans support, in addition to an overwhelming number of Democrats. This is not some extreme policy demand. These people, these Republicans who are supposedly part of the governing wing, they just refuse to show any backbone, any fight, any willingness to work with pragmatic Democrats. There are pragmatic Democrats. Not everybody over there is AOC. They won't do it. None of them are willing to actually have the backbone to say, you know what? No, there is a red line for me. I will not support somebody that has advanced conspiracies about the 2020 election. I will not support nationalist clowns like Donald Trump and Jim Jordan to be the leaders of my party. But time and again, instead, they've just gone along to get along. And that's a big reason why we are here right now. And it's a big reason why, frankly, I was deeply worried that Jim Jordan was going to get the speakership all along. Because, as they say, past performance is the best indicator of future results. And the past performance of moderate Republicans, so-called moderate Republicans, is time and again to be cowardly, to be unwilling to stand up for their principles, to be unwilling to fight the extremists on their own side, and instead to fold to them and try to pretend like the real threat is coming from Joe Biden, and the center left. It's shameful, it's dispiriting, but it's the reality that we're living in. We'll continue to monitor this, and come Tuesday, we'll have an actual vote on the House floor and see if maybe against that past performance, we will finally find 5 Republicans, who will do the right thing and show some gumption. Let me say, I'm not holding my breath.